Hello and welcome to another part of the set review. Today we're looking at the green cards in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. This is for limited only, of course, not talking about their constructed relevance. If you have not been here before for how I rate cards, this is the way I do it. It's a little bit different maybe than the way other people rate cards. It's fairly simple though. Tier 1 is good, Tier 5 is bad. Here's a brief description of sort of what the tiers look like, what they're sort of meant to represent. If you haven't seen them before, feel free to take a look at them. And I am just going to get started with Aloe Alchemist. 1 and a green for a 3/2 with Trample. When it becomes plotted, target creature gets +3/+2 and gains Trample until end of turn, and it has plot for 1 and a green. So this card's like really sick. Very rare to see me start off with a Tier 1 rating here, and I actually haven't given as many Tier 1 ratings to non-multicolored cards in this set as I usually do. I'm negative for some reason. But this card, I think, is worthy of it. And the reason I think is fairly simple. Cards that give you value when you plot them are extremely high value, because obviously the worst thing about plotting is that you're not affecting the board or doing something the turn that you're plotting, and things that allow you to sort of get something out of doing that are really good. And this is also just a card you can play on turn 2, and it's going to be one of your best 2-drops, so you're pretty much always happy to have this card in your hand. Like, you play it on turn 2, it's a 3/2 trample, you're thrilled about it. You draw this card on turn 4, you plot it for 2, you get in for like a 5 because your opponent can't block whatever your 3-drop was. And then you have a 3/2 next turn that you can use to like double spell and like do other stuff. Like, that's also sick. Like, there's just no real like downside to this having the ability to deal like 5 damage to your opponent randomly. Obviously, you can only plot as a sorcery, so this isn't like a combat trick or whatever, then it would really be truly insane. But it is still very, very good. And yeah. Ankle Biter, single green mana for 1/1 Death Touch. So they've done this type of effect before. Never super exciting. I'm pretty down on it. I think some people are higher on this than I am. There are a lot of 1/1s running around in the set that will like negate this. Yeah, I'm just not super excited about this type of card. There's not really, it isn't really doing anything. It doesn't work with any of the set mechanics. It just kind of exists, and I don't think it's very good as a result. Beastbond Outcaster. 2 and a green for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with your power 4 or greater, draw a card. And you can plot it for 1 and a green. So, as I've talked about in previous episodes of this, I think plot 2 specifically is going to be like really, really good, and any card that has plot 2 I think is going to be significantly better than cards that plot for 3. So that's part of the reason I like this card a lot. Like, getting to cast, your 3-drop as a 4/2 mana, like whenever you're getting the thing, like, you're still getting a deal, right? Like, you're still getting a good deal on this card, even if you're like playing it later. Like, mana efficiency matters at any stage of the game, right? That's sort of something I like to say. And honestly, you're gonna be able to cast this on turn 3 pretty reliably. Like, there's a lot of 3 mana 4/2s in this set. There's just a lot of them, and they're decent. They're not amazing, but they're at least decent. And this thing, it allows you to sort of get your value right away, and I think you're going to be able to do that. Yes, your opponent, theoretically, the reason this, is maybe has some downside is your opponent can see it coming and be like, oh, well, maybe I'll hold up a removal spell. It's like, well, but you can't just be holding up removal spells, on turn 3, right? It's just not reasonable to be like, your opponent's empty board to be holding up removal spells. So, this card's good. I really like the way that it interacts with the set mechanics. Betrayal at the Vault. 4 green for an instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each of up to 2 other target creatures. So essentially, it's a bite spell, but it's double. You can hit 2 creatures. Yeah, this is not good. I mean, 6 mana for your bite spell is bad enough, and then like think about this, right? You're essentially paying for 2 3-mana bite spells. Well, that's not a fair comparison, right? Because I'm essentially drawing a card because I'm getting, 2 whatever. But you're overpaying for an effect that is already dubious, right? Like, it's already a dubious effect. The fact that you can't Like, if this was like 3 mana instant speed bite, kicker, 3 mana instant speed, do second bite, this would be a lot better because there'd be a buyout at least. That is not the case here. There's no buyout. You have to pay the full freight even if you only want to remove one creature, which is just terrible. And it's also double pipped. Like, I don't like anything about this card. There's better removal in the set. You don't need to play this. Bristlepack Sentry. 100 green for a 3/3 with Defenders. It can attack without as long as as long as you control a creature with power 4 or greater. It doesn't have Defender. Basically, it can attack. Yeah, I mean, this is good. They've this was a common that they had printed before, and it was very good, and they haven't gone back to the well since because it was too good. I don't think this is too good. I think this is just solid, but again, you do need enabling, and you're gonna want this if you have enablers, and if you don't have enablers, it's gonna be kind of it's gonna be whatever. It's still okay. Like, 2 mana 3/3 Defender is not the end of the world. Bristly Bill Spine Sower. 1 green for a 2/2. Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and you can pay 3 green to double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. But you're not going to be activating that ability very often. But this is still a good card. It's a 2-drop, and then your opponent's, and then it just immediately starts getting value on your next turn once you play a land. That's good. That's a thing that you want, is to get value on playing your lands, because you're going to be playing lands. So, yeah. And, later in the game, you can play this and then play the land and get the value immediately. So, yeah, just a lot of good stuff. Again, the activated ability not super relevant, but just a nice little guy. Not amazing, not busted by any means, but there is a little counter theme going on in green, so sort of helps enable that as well. Cactarantula, 4 green for a 6/5. It costs 1 less to cast if you control a desert. It has reach, and when it becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. So you could sort of read this as when it dies, when it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. You could sort of read it like that, and that effect is usually not very good. However, that effect is a lot better on a creature that your opponent basically has to kill. Dies triggers we've seen just aren't very good. This is essentially a dies trigger. But I mean, think about like a 5 mana 6/5 reach. That's pretty big. Like, you're getting a pretty good deal there. Like, I mean, obviously you need deserts, but I think, again, this is sort of one of those rewards for being in green, and green just caring about deserts. Like, green wants to be doing desert stuff, pretty much no matter what. It's the most heavily desert-themed color. So I do think this card is going to be a pretty decent, top-end card in those green decks that are just, because it just blocks everything. It's a 6/5, it has reach, like, it just, your opponent's never getting through it unless they remove it, or they can, go super wide, which is doable for some colors in this set, but, your cards don't have to solve every problem for you, right? This one can solve a lot of your problems. It is still like a 5 or 6 drop, so it's not going to get rated higher than tier 3 for the most part, but, it's good. It's a good card. I think you're going to play this card. Now this card, Colossal Rattleworm, 2 green for a 6/5 trample. It has flash as long as you control a desert, and you can pay 100 green to exile it from your graveyard and search your library for the desert card and put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. This card's ridiculous. I don't really even need to talk about why this card's so good. Its rate is just insane, even if you don't have a desert, and you're going to be having deserts, so this is going to have flash a high percentage of the time, and it's just going to be an absolute beating. Dance of the Tumbleweeds, 1 green for a sorcery with Spree. You could pay an additional colorless mana to search your library for a basic land card or desert card and put it onto the battlefield and shuffle. Not tapped, be advised. And you pay 3 additional to create an XX green elemental creature token. So, this card is sort of flexible. The 3 mana mode to ramp you is not especially great. But you can make a 5 mana like 5/5, and it's not a complete disaster. And I don't know, this is sort of card advantage. Like, when I saw this card at first, I was like, oh man, it's sick, and I was like, but it is a bunch of mana. But getting 3 mana to ramp you isn't terrible on turn 3. Usually those cards' problems is that later in the game they just don't do anything, and this does something later in the game. So I don't know. I kind of like it. I don't hate it. At least I don't hate it, I would say. Would be my by my take on this one. Drover Grizzly. 2 and a green for 4/2 mount. When it attacks while saddled, creatures you control gain trample until end of turn, and it has saddle for 1. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a solid enabler of your mount and power 4 synergies. You're not really going to want it outside of that, but it's fine. Gives your stuff trample sometimes. Free Strider Commando. 2 and a green for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters, if it wasn't cast or no mana was spent to cast it, and you can plot it for 3 and a green. So this card's doing a lot of cool stuff. So you can plot it for 4, and you're essentially getting a 5/5 for 4 mana on turn 5, which is good. You can play it on turn 3 as just a 3/3, which is okay, but not very good. You can reanimate it, which just makes you get your thing that makes you a 5/5 when you reanimate it. So, I mean, there's lots of cool ways to do something with this. I don't think it's amazing, but it's good. I think it's just, card you can cast on turn 3, card you can cast on, spend mana on turn 4. Not really a whole lot to complain about, honestly. I don't hate it. Free Strider Lookout. 2 and a green for a 3/3 with reach. When you commit a crime, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped, put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. This ability triggers only once each turn. Yeah, I mean, this is fine. It's again, 2 mana 3/3 reach, 3 mana 3/3 reach baseline, and then you look at, when you commit crimes, you can start getting lands, ramping, which green doesn't do super well, but whatever, it's basically just free upside, so no complaints from me on this one. Full steam ahead. 3 green for a sorcery until end of turn. Each creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample, and this creature can't be blocked by more than one creature. This is a big old overrun, It's just a lot of, damage. It's just a lot of damage that you're going to be doing to your opponent's creatures, essentially. Yeah, I mean, the whole deal here is that you're just, even if you have 2 or 3 creatures, this is a lot. So, again, not super high priority, but you probably want one of these in some percentage of your decks, and in those decks, it's going to be really good. Giant Beaver. 3 and a green for a 4/4 with Vigilance. When it attacks while saddled, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature that's saddled at this turn, and you can saddle for 3. Yep, another sort of solid, 4 power matters enabler. It's a mount. It gives counters. Just does a bunch of, solid stuff. It's a 4-drop. You don't really want to prioritize 4-drops with no ETB super highly, but, I mean, this is big. It's gonna block well, It does enough, I think, to be a solid card. Gold Rush. 1 and a green for an instant. Create a treasure token. Until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gains +2/+2 for each treasure you control. So you're seeing these combat tricks that, do something and give value in some way. They tend to be pretty good. Not a whole lot going on with treasures in this set. There's some light treasure synergy going on, but it's not a central theme. In some sets this would be busted. I don't think this set is one of them, but I do think it's going to still be very good. It's going to be probably underrated early. It is, it is not, unlike some cards you will see that give a treasure back, this is not really, essentially 1 mana. It's not that, because combat tricks really need to be, actual, 1 mana up front. So, this is not that, but it's still okay. Goldvein Hydra. X and a green for a 0/0 with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And when it dies, you create a number of tapped treasure tokens equal to its power. So, again, I mean, this is, fine, right? So, let's kind of, walk it through, right? 2 mana, 1/1, not good enough. 3 mana, 2/2, not good enough. 4 mana, 3/3, we're starting to get there. 5 mana, 4/4, okay, now we're really doing it. So, I mean, once you get to 4 or 5 mana, this is okay to play, and, it does scale into the late game. The dies and making treasure tokens thing is not super relevant, but if it dies and then you have the trick that gives you a bunch of stuff with treasures, yep, you did it, you did the thing. It's pretty unlikely for that to happen, but and again, you do need to sort of pay you know, I guess this kind of reminds me of Shivan Devastator, but it doesn't have flying. Like, Shivan Devastator had flying and haste, which is a little bit better than, you know, Vigilance Trample Haste. Um, maybe I should just maybe I should just put it up to tier 2 then, if I'm giving the Shivan Devastator comps. The problem is that a 5 mana 4/4 flyer is a lot better than a 5 mana 4/4 that doesn't have flying. Like, even with all these abilities, I don't think this is like worse than Devastator. Devastator was a tier 1 card. Don't get me wrong. I guess like no, you know what? I'm gonna move it up one. There we go. It's been moved up one. I just decided that, you know, there's gonna be enough ways to like make a bunch of mana in green. That you're going to be able to sort of hold off on casting this until it's like X equals 4, and then it's really good, and then, you know, you can just dump your mana into this late, and it kind of like wins the game. So I think for those situations, I'm going to bump it up a little bit. But I think this is going to be an overdrafted card still, because, again, it's a mythic, and I don't think it's premium, so yeah, be advised. Hard Bristle Bandit. 1 and a green for a 1/1, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color, and whenever you commit a crime, untap it. You can only do that once each turn. So, it's a mana elf that adds 1 mana of any color, which is good, but it doesn't really provide any late game upside, which is kind of the problem with these type of effects. Providing 2 mana in a turn is nice and all, but again, the problem is not that this isn't providing you enough mana. It often is that this isn't doing something on turn 6, you know? It's like doing nothing, so we'll see. I think it's okay. I'm not super jazzed about it. I think this is worse than like your Poison Dart Frog from LCI. I think this is worse than Tunnel Tipster because it doesn't like, grow. So we'll see how it pans out. Intrepid Stable Master, 1 and a green for a 2/2 with reach. You can tap it to add a green mana, or you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast mount or vehicle spells. So this one I like a lot more, as you can see. Mostly because it's just a fine 2-drop, like even without the ability to add mana. You know, 2 mana, 2/2 reach, not super behind rate, like that's pretty much on rate. They actually don't do a lot of 2 mana, 2/2 reach for some reason. I don't really know why. Maybe it's because there's a lot of 1/1 flyer tokens they make and a lot of stuff, but then they do a bunch of 1/3 reach. Anyways, being able to add 2 mana to cast mount spells is kind of sick. Like, the one hesitancy I have with this is that I don't like a lot of the mount spells. I think a lot of the mount spells are not the best commons, so, you know, that's a concern. But, I mean, it also fixes your mana for the mount spells. Not like perfectly fixes your mana, but it fixes your mana pretty good. And yeah, this thing's just an enormous threat. I should possibly move it up to tier 1. It's really, really strong. Again, my one concern about it is I don't know how good mount stuff is going to be. And so how many mounts are you actually going to have in your deck? Not sure. But otherwise, I just think this thing's great. Map the Frontier. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and or desert cards, put them onto the battlefield, tap and shuffle. We've seen these type of effects before. The 4 mana like ramp 2 lands things. They're just not very good. Yeah, I mean, getting 2 deserts is nice, but not yeah, I mean, it's just not what you're looking for, you know, these days. It's just 4 mana, no board impact is too slow. Ornery Tumblewag, 2 and a green for 2/2 at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. When it attacks while saddled, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature, and use saddle for 2. Yeah, this card's sick. This is just Siege Veteran. We've seen Siege Veteran is nuts. This card's probably slightly worse than Siege Veteran, but I don't know. It's close, and whatever. Who cares? It's definitely like insane. So. Not worried about getting this grade wrong, to be honest with you. Outcaster Greenblade. 2 to green for a 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land card or desert. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle, and it gets +1/+1 for each desert you control. So this card's sick. This is just Nervous Gardener, except you get to draw the card immediately. essentially. Um, and it also scales with the game because, I mean, in some game states, this is just going to be a 3-mana 2/3 already when you have a desert, and if you have a critical mass of deserts, this is going to just be like a 4/4 or 4/5 or whatever. I think that's pretty achievable. And again, you're going to want to do desert stuff. Like the deserts deck just seems so good to me. It may not be like a day 1 deck, it might be like a week 2, sort of week 3 deck, but I think during that time it's going to be insanely strong, and I'm really excited about it. Outcast or Trailblazer. 2 and a green for a 4/2 when it enters the battlefield, add 1 mana of any color. When another creature with power or 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card, and you can plot for 2 and a green. So, on turn 3, you can plot this, and then, ensure, essentially, not ensure, but, be pretty certain that you're going to get to draw a card next turn. Now again, your opponent gets to see that. Like, are you supposed to just play this on 3? Are you supposed to plot it? We will find out over the course of the format whether or not that's true. I would lean towards plotting it. 2 toughness on turn 3, not really blocking anything anyway. Might as well plot it. You're probably throwing that mana away on turn 3. You're going to get a little bit of your value back by playing it on turn 4. You're probably supposed to be plotting this one. That's my early take on this card specifically. I think it's going to be pretty good. Amazing, maybe not, but pretty good at least. Sure. Patient Naturalist. 2 and a green for a 2/3 when it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. Put a land card from among the milled cards into your hand if you can't create a treasure token. So this is essentially Eccentric Farmer. And that card, one of my favorite cards ever printed. I love Eccentric Farmer. And this card basically gives you upside if you miss. Now, sometimes Eccentric Farmer could let you get Evolving Wilds and then Eccentric Farmer to get it back. There is no Evolving Wilds in this set anyway, so that doesn't really matter. That downside doesn't matter. And yeah, whatever. This is basically the same as Eccentric Farmer. There's subtle differences, but like it's just sick. Like the card's just actually cracked, and putting stuff in your graveyard is great. And if you miss, you still get a treasure token, which is good. Yeah, no complaints about this one. Oh boy. Railway Brawler. 3 green for a 5/5 reach trample. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put X+1/+1 counters on it where X is its power and it is plot for 3 and a green. Why this has plot for 3 and a green, I genuinely don't understand, because it's I think what a lot of times the play pattern this is going to look like, it goes plot this on 4, opponent concedes. I think is what's going to happen a lot of times, because it's basically just like, well, I have a 0 mana 5/5 next turn, and then my next creature is going to be, I don't know, like a 10/10. It's like, okay, it's like, yeah, that seems reasonable. That seems like a reasonable amount of power and toughness to be putting on the board on turn 5. So yeah, I don't know. This thing's ridiculous. It's probably one of the best rares in the set. It doesn't have an ETB. Okay, that's fine. I don't need my 4 mana 5/5s that that causes like, you know what I mean? Like I think it's gonna be just okay. I think it's gonna be all right. Rambling Possum. 2 and a green for a 3/3 when it attacks while saddled. You get this +1/+2 until end of turn. Then you may return any number of creatures that settled it to their owner's hand and saddle for 1. So you can like bounce your value creatures. You don't really want to be doing that as much as you probably think you do, but this is kind of nice. It reminds me sort of like Geothermal Kami. So it has kind of like Geothermal Kami type vibes. I don't think it's, I don't know. It's probably better because it's just a better on-rate creature, and you can like do stuff. You can like not have to do the thing, and like saddling triggers. You can have your summoning sick creatures trigger saddle and just bounce them every single turn, which is okay. It does get +1/+2, so it's a 4/5 when it attacks, which means it's probably not going to be easy to block. So I don't know. I don't hate it. I think it's a solid 3-drop. Raucous Entertainer. 1 and a green for a 2/2, and you can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that entered the battlefield this turn. So this card seems pretty good. It's a 2-drop that is just a 2 mana 2/2, which isn't great, and you have to pay a mana. So, like there's a lot of cost going on here, but if you make a thing that has multiple creatures, you're getting sick value. You only have to trigger this like 1 time for it to be good. It also smooths out your draws, which is like a sneaky element of this card being good, which is that like Well, I have two 2-drops in my hand and not a 3-drop. Well, you can play this and then your 2-drop on turn 3 and give it another counter, and you're like, that's basically a 3-drop. It's like, okay, you basically got there, you know what I mean? So, I think it's nice, it's solid. Not like I don't love it, but I think it's good. Reach for the Sky. 3 and a green for an enchantment with flash. It is an aura, enchanted creature gets +3/+2 and has reach. And when it is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. So this doesn't solve a lot of the problems that auras have, which is that, when your opponent casts the aura, your creature can just be killed by a removal spell. And this one's 4 mana, so I do think this one is kind of okay, and I put it not in tier 5, just because, like, it is a decent amount of stats. Like, +3/+2 reach, like, for 4 mana. Like, you could just on turn 4 play this as your 4-drop and make your, like, 3 mana creature into a, like, 6/6. And then, I don't know, I mean, like, a 6/6 that's attacking on, turn 4, it's pretty big, and then when the 6/6 dies, this draws you a card. Okay, like, I think that play pattern is kind of fine, and as a result, I have it in tier 4 and not tier 5. Rise of the Varmints. 3 and a green for a sorcery, create X 2/1 green varmint creature tokens, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and you can pull out this for 2 and a green. This card is just spider spawning. Now, spider spawning, spiders had reach. This card does not have reach, which actually is pretty key and, like, pretty significant. But what this card does have that spider spawning didn't have is that it is plottable. So you can plot this on turn 3, and then you can just kind of wait. You can just kind of wait around. You can cast, like, even if you make 2 2/1s, that's not bad. Like, that's fine, and that's very achievable. And, like, if you make 3, it's great. Like, you're really happy about that. And if you make 4, again, this is a deck. This is like a thing that you put in, like, a green-black deck. It's not for every deck, but it's possible that this is good enough that you just play this in every green deck. I don't think that's the case. I think you do want to be doing the thing, but I think that's going to be worth doing. You can get one of these and just be like, well, I'm in. I'm all the way in on doing this thing. Smuggler's Surprise. Single black mana for a spree instant. So you can pay an additional 2 to mill 4, put 2 creature cards or land cards from one of the milled cards into your hand. You can pay an additional 4 and a green to put 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield, and you can pay an additional 1 for creatures you control with power 4 or greater to gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. All these modes are very, situational and not exciting, and you just aren't going to be able to do something with this unlimited. It's just, I think, too clunky and bad overall. Snakeskin Veil. Single green mana for an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, gains hexproof until end of turn. We've seen this before. It's very good. It's still going to be very good. That's the story on Snakeskin Veil. Spine Woods Armadillo. 4 green for a 7/7 with reach and ward 3. You can pay 1 and a green and discard it and search your library for a basic land card or a desert card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. You gain 3 life. Yeah, this card's messed up. This card is Hard Migration. But it's, instead of being, as good as Herd Migration, it's almost as good as Herd Migration, okay? It is just a 6 mana 7/7 reach ward 3 instead of, 7 mana make 5 3/3s, which is a little bit better, I will admit. But this card is still sick. This card is still really, really good. It enables a bunch of synergies. It fixes your mana. It gains you 3 life to make up for the fact that you're, discarding your late game spell early. It's just really good. You can, like, reanimate it. Like, this card's sick. I don't know, I love this card. Spinewoods Paladin. 4 and a green for a 5/4 trample. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, and you can plot it for 3 and a green. Yeah, I mean, this looks like a 5-drop that you can put in your deck, and it's going to be totally serviceable, and I'm not going to complain about it. It looks fine. Yeah, I don't know. Not, like, gain 3 life, pretty good. You can, like, plot it on 4, you're getting a discount. Like it. Stubborn Burrow Fiend. 1 and a green for a 2/2. When it becomes saddled for the first time each turn, mill 2 cards. Then it gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. And you can saddle for 2. So you're not going to be saddling this a ton early unless you really want to be milling your stuff. But something like cards like this sort of exemplify saddle is kind of free, right? On turn 3, if you're attacking, you play your 3-drop, you attack with this, you saddle it, because your 3-drop probably you didn't want to block anyway, but maybe you did, but you probably didn't. And then you get to attack with this thing, you're the one putting pressure on your opponent, you know what I mean, all that good stuff. So, yeah, I mean, this seems okay, but not super exciting, essentially, is my verdict on it. Throw from the saddle. 1 green for sorcery. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on it instead if it's a mount. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So you've seen, you know, bite spells that give your creature a bonus to their stats before biting tend to be pretty good. And I expect this to also be pretty good. Yeah, it's a sorcery, whatever. I mean, again, Bite Down on Crime was a card that everybody underrated, myself included, because we were like, oh, it's 4 mana. And it, like, but the thing is, like, giving +2/+0 for 4 mana just made attacks, like, so good. It made it so your opponent basically couldn't block ever. And that was in a set where a lot of the creatures had Ward 2, that card was still good. So I'm actually, like, a big believer in this card. I don't think being sorcery speed is that impactful, to be honest. Obviously, it's not, like, literally... they didn't... I mean, the card in the set Clear Shot, which is basically the instant speed version of this. That card's sick. That card's an absolute blowout. It's great every single time. This card is not as good as that card, but I'm still rating it very highly because Clear Shot is so good, and even, you know, taking 1 mana off it to make it a sorcery, it's still going to be good. Trash the Town. Single green mana for an instant with Spree. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. And target creature gains trample until end of turn for additional +1. And then another additional +1 target creature gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player. You draw 2 cards. So this is one of those, like, combat tricks that potentially I'm misevaluating. It seems very clunky and expensive to me. It's another card that it's like, well, I hope my opponent doesn't ever have mana up because... like, what if they do? It's like, yeah, you know, like, you just can't cast this into open mana. There's stuff like that. You can have it, you know, go to different targets, so that at least mitigates some of the blowout potential, but it's still not. You're still getting blown out, kind of. So, not my favorite, but it could surprise me. Tumbleweed Rising. 1 green for a sorcery, create an XX green elemental creature token where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, and you can plot it for 2 and a green. So this card requires help, but I mean, when you sort of think, let's sort of walk through what this does. So you don't want to play this on turn 2, obviously. You probably don't want to play this on turn 3, so you plot it on turn 3. Is that okay? It's probably fine. And then on turn 4, you can go play your 4-drop. Or your 3-drop even. It's probably got 4 power, because everything in the set has 4 power in green. And then you make a 4/4. Does that make up for your tempo loss on turn 3? I would say yeah. I think it pretty much does. And in some games, you're just gonna go, you know, 2-drop, 3-drop, this plus plots do something on turn 4, and you make another 4, like make a 4/4 when you have a 4/2 in play. That's pretty, like, 2 mana 4/4 is pretty good, and I think this is going to be that a high-ish percentage of the time. I don't know. It is situational. Maybe I should move it down a tier. Maybe I'm too. I originally had it in tier 3, then I moved it up because I was like, well, I mean, you're going to be able to make a 0 mana 4/4, like, pretty good. Enables double spell synergies, like. There are creatures in the set, like there's a bunch of big green creatures, and I think a lot of them are good, so I think this in the late game just, like, copies your biggest thing. It's like, well, make another 6/6, and your opponent's like, well, I guess I'm just dead. And it's like, yeah, they're probably just dead, so we'll see how it pans out, but I'm optimistic about this one. And the last green card, Voracious Varmint. 1 and a green for a 2/2 with Vigilance. You can sacrifice it, pay 1 and sacrifice it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. We've seen these type of effects before. It's pretty good. It's really hard for your opponent to play around. It's very annoying. Yeah, I don't know. It's going off. It blows stuff up, and it's also just a good 2-drop. And that's it. That's my green set review. Shorter today, shorter one than the other ones. I was kind of ripping through it, but didn't have as much to talk about. Also, my voice is dying, so we will see if I can keep doing these. That's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed. There's going to be more of these to come. There are more of these that already exist for OTJ. Feel free to go check them out.